All right. Well, happy Tuesday, everybody, and welcome back to another Future Focus where we are living at the intersection of business, technology, and human experience. I am looking forward to today's discussion as I look forward to all of my discussions, but I think this one in particular has a unique flavor that I'm hoping will change the way everybody thinks about what's happening in the world of technology right now. We're going to be talking about sustainability, which at a time when things are moving so fast, we're often making decisions and taking actions just based on what's in front of our nose. It's easy to forget about what's around the corner or what's 10 steps ahead, and is what we're doing designed and done with purpose that will ultimately be a sustainable solution. So there was no better person to have on the show with me to talk about this than Ricky Marton, and not the singing star, by the way, which again, when I saw this pop up on my calendar, I was like, wait a minute, are we going to be living La Vida Loca? And no, we're talking global sustainability. So Ricky from Koru, he's the founder and CEO of Koru that specializes in focusing on tech and sustainability. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, Christopher, thanks for having me. And I'm excited to, and don't worry for all the viewers out there, I'm not going to start singing and breaking out the Living La Vida Loca just yet. Maybe for like the after credit rollouts for those unique, individuals, but I'm really looking forward to the conversation. It's a fun topic for sure.
I have a custom outro of Ricky singing for everybody. So stick around till the end and you'll hear that. What's funny is, does anybody ever comment? Is it like one of those eye roll things that happens, or is it a rarity where somebody says something?
So we're in this age where I think there's the younger generations who actually don't know who Ricky Marton is anymore. And so you see some like hostesses fair. And individuals and like the younger group that don't. But there was a solid probably 15 years of my life, every phone call, every reservation, every restaurant, every place you put your name, Ricky Marton, they'd be like, wait, like the singer? Or you get all these creative answers. And so like I enjoy it because it makes me like memorable and people make funny jokes and you hear the same line over and over again. But every once in a while you get like a really creative one. You're like, I tip my hat. I've never heard that one before. It's
that is so funny. Have you ever leaned into it and been like, yes, it is?
So on when I'm calling sometimes for like a reservation, there's a couple of times where like I say, hello, my name is Ricky Marton. And like, you just like, I swear you hear like scuffling or something like that. But the issue is then you get to the restaurant and you're like, hi, I'm Ricky Marton. And they just give this, like, there's like 4 of them there just waiting at the
this
podium.
Look of like, disappointment. Just this like,
oh no, especially like a higher end restaurant. Like if you're in Chicago or New York or something, like it has happened before. I'm like, I just need to like put big sunglasses on, maybe a low cut V one time and just like roll with it. And you never know.
Just show up and see if you get the VIP treatment. I love that. Exactly. Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, I don't know. Christopher Lind is not exactly some famous name. So I've never had that where people are like, wow, are you that guy? Like, no, I'm not. But I would probably lean into that, would be my tendency. Anyway, enough on the shenanigans there. I am curious though, just a little bit of background, because all jokes aside about the name, you're focused on sustainability and technology, which can sometimes be seen in competition with each other. But that's a pretty unique niche to be focused in. So I'm actually curious, background-wise, how did you end up getting to that point? Because there's always an interesting founder story that took you to this place of, yeah, it's kind of quirky, and here's how I landed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess let's take it back to the start. So I'm from Chicago originally, went to school down in Florida, couldn't deal with the winters of Chicago, played soccer, got a degree.
You don't like it up here?
that Wisconsin winter, I mean, it's great to some extent, but man, get me south of that, line down there, keep me warm. But anyway, so I actually had like no concept or no like very, very like strategic plan of getting into business, starting my own business, like entrepreneurship, really like big tech route. I was in graphic design, marketing, some like little business minors just to help kind of round myself out. Went corporate right out of school, worked for litigation service companies, suit and tie, traveling around, and just kind of like every other millennial, I was like, I want to do something that has more impact, more, make a bit of a difference with my work. And from there,
so graphic design, I'm actually, and sorry, but I warned you I was going to do this because I'm always curious as a learning person, the skills piece of how these came together. So you went to school. There obviously was some sort of, it seems like you wanted to do something in business-ish, but marketing, graphic design and then suit and tie with legal. Was it just one of those, like, I think back to my background and I was kind of like, I don't know what I want to do. And so I kind of found a space, but how did that happen?
Yeah, my dad, he started a company when he was younger. He's a computer consultant, and he's been doing that his entire career. And so I had the computer, I had like kind of the business savvy, a little bit of like kind of
Okay.
entrepreneurship ish. So I took that, but then going to undergrad, I literally had no idea what I wanted to do. I had this idea of like medical illustration, graphic design. I've always been kind of artsy. I'm good at drawing, things like that. I was like, I also want to like, find a unique edge, not do something, rote and the same thing every day. And the job at the litigation service company was actually as a multimedia designer and literally
Okay.
program. Yeah. And so that was like the weird thing. And like, I ended up
I thought it
shifting.
was like I was a legal analyst, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
From graphic design to legal? Okay. You were
Yeah.
doing multimedia work though.
Yeah, well, and so maybe there's a lesson too, because like I was put on this like very, very menial task as you're a new employee. Hey, so it can take you like 3 weeks to do. And I basically wrote a script that automated the entire thing. And within a single day, I went to my boss, the owner of the whole company. I was like, I'm done. Give me something more. And so he threw me into this training with a bunch of consultants who were, 20 years my senior. And actually I got a promotion after 2 days of work at the company and didn't do any more
Oh,
multimedia design
that's a strong
for the rest of my
start.
career. Yeah, it was my badge of honor. So it was fun. And so like that is what kind of evolved my mindset of like, I can kind of create this own path. I want to do something that I really want to do. And it was actually when I was on one of the cases where I was out in Seattle, working on this like terribly long case. And I had the idea for the first business, which was basically to create an online marketplace. So combining tech as well as sustainable clothing brands. And so the whole concept was to create, I like to say, a mini Amazon. So you could buy from different brands, items, price ranges, whatnot, but everything that you purchased was tied to either an altruistic cause, a philanthropic cause, or had some sort of sustainable tie within the business. And so that was really what started
Sustainability
everything.
was part of your, and it goes back to kind of what I think you were saying before. You had this desire not only to kind of take the business and tech wizardry, but then also kind of go, but I want to do it for some bigger purpose than just making somebody more money type of a thing.
Bingo. Yeah, exactly. And the irony is kind of clear too, because like what we're doing with Koru, I'll get into that later, but like it's a concept that we live in a materialistic world. Like people are going to buy clothes, they're going to buy a purse, they're going to buy a hat. Why not have some sort of benefit? And so like that concept of using business as a vessel for good has really stuck with me and kind of been my guiding light in this. And so technology is a way to amplify that reach and the scale. And I think using the lens of like, how can I make this impactful to some extent has been kind of what I'm like trying to figure out, because I'm not asking people to, like sell their house and move to a third world country or, do anything rash like that, but make it work for your own living style. And like, it's really simple if you put it like those simple variables in one place.
Well, and it goes back to, I think what you're bringing up that I think is really helpful where I've seen sustainable solutions work well is to your point, when you aren't necessarily asking somebody to do a 180-degree flip in who they are or the way they do things, but more say, hey, you're doing this already. Can you go maybe one step further and maybe do it in a meaningful way that's positive instead of just, the traditional way, which again, it's a lot easier going back to, from my side, kind of the psychology of things, nudge theory of you can slowly nudge people towards making bigger things. If you ask people to go from eating Doritos and never having worked out in their life to P90X or insanity and nothing but green juice, it's just too much and it doesn't stick.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk to businesses all the time and they see it as like this very overwhelming thing, sustainability, ESG, there's so many complexities and convoluted things and regulations. And it's like, take a step back and say, what do you have as your business? What assets are you working with? What resources? And take one step in that direction. And you realize that it's kind of like that aha moment when you realize, oh, just because, if I save a little bit of water or I do something that's like more eco-friendly, I can actually save money because I'm spending less. And there's like those little decisions, I think, kind of get the ball rolling, because you start to realize that, like you mentioned, being sustainable can actually be beneficial from your business or personal life or something like that. It's just about finding that unique avenue that pulls them together, which is so important.
Well, and I think one of the things that's unique about especially doing this on a organizational level is that sometimes things on an individual level, when you say, hey, if you made this sustainable change to an individual, it can feel very trivial, where you go, well, if I stop doing this, like what's that impact really going to have? But as you pair sustainability with scalability in an organization where you go, well, yeah, but if we make this 1 degree turn, you're an organization of this size, you scale that one transaction or that one change, across your whole organization, that actually puts a pretty sizable dent in this thing versus if you just ask, Jane down the street to, hey, change this one thing. And she's the only person who's actually doing something like that. So I think you have so much more opportunity to see an impact on what you're doing versus, just on an individualistic level.
Yeah, and it's funny too because I've had these conversations with friends, and they come over and I have like recycling bin this and that, and I'm not the type of person that's like the most perfect quintessential recycler. I compost, do all this thing, but like the real nature of it is like I want to live my life how I want to live my life, but like business is what I think has the potential to have true impact. And like you said, if you make these small changes and you extrapolate that out to the reach, the scale, the supply chains that they work with, like that's when you have the tremendous impact. And inversely, like I know there's a stat out there that was, when headlines at one point in time, it was since disproved that it was like an unfair study, but it was like 100 companies in the world are responsible for 90% of the global emissions or something stark and shocking like that. And while that's not entirely accurate from the number perspective, it still shows that companies do, make this world go round, and they also have the impact and the effects that their reach is really showing, which is kind of remarkable if you think about it, how large they actually are.
Okay, so I'm actually really curious. You brought something up about people will ask you questions, and I think sustainability is one of those words that has a lot of inherent assumptions that people have. Oh, you mean this and that. I'm actually curious, in especially the space you're in, what are some of those assumptions you've encountered that you go, it can be that, but it's not helpful? Because I think sometimes that contributes to people going, oh yeah, I can't do that. Or there's no way I can go, because in their heads, they hear sustainability and they automatically go to, oh, you want me to clean all the CO2 out of the air? And you're like, well, that's actually not what I'm talking. So I'm actually curious your definition on what that means and the kind of assumptions that you often run into where you have to kind of course correct people and go, actually, that's not just it.
Yeah, it's a really good one, Chris, because it's something that I experience on a regular basis. And actually, our previous name of a company was actually called Philanthropy. The concept of like creating philanthropy, allowing companies to be more altruistic and philanthropic, sustainable, and immediately that word. And I'll get back to like sustainable, but it's like you hear that word philanthropic, or you hear sustainable, you hear environmental, you hear impact, all these buzzwords that we've actually learned to kind of. We don't avoid them, but we don't associate ourselves with them directly because you get that preconceived notion from a semantic standpoint of what sustainability means. And so I think a lot of people and businesses, especially when they hear sustainable, they're like, you want us to completely revamp or completely change. You want us to omit X or completely revamp Y. Right. And it's that like kind of daunting fact that like they see it as a really expensive, not a need to have, a nice to have, maybe something to do with extra fun, something to do because their leadership is like feeling, fluffy or feels like giving away. And it's not a donation, it's not charity, it's not anything like that. At the end of the day, it's an actual business driver, and it's a solution that can save your company money, distinguish you as a business. And from an individual standpoint, it can actually be more beneficial to you and like the people around you. And so sustainability from like a big picture perspective is like, it's not a new term. And it's one of the things I think is a little bit frustrating because the word sustainable has so many different contexts. If something's sustainable, it's built to last. But sustainability, you hear in the headlines, and it's like green, go green, carbon emissions, like reducing footprint, and that's what everyone associates it with. And I'm like, no, that's not necessarily the case. Like that is one portion of it. Just like ESG, everyone thinks of environmental, but it's also the social piece, it's the governance, it's the board structures, it's the rules, the bylaws, regulation. And it's these like immediate headlines that people nowadays just kind of jump to conclusions of what you do as a company or an individual or a business or the person you are. I'm like, that's not accurate at all. And it's about like kind of being thorough and explaining that very, very clearly, I think. But there is a lot of those like kind of roll your eyes, we don't.
Oh, I'm sure. Like I can see people just being like, oh, so you compost and you don't eat meat, and you're like, just because I care about sustainability does not necessarily bring with it all these assumptions that you've placed in your head.
Yeah. And so we're in this early stage of tech business, not to pull back into it, but in the early stage, we had people, they would just do an outreach or they'd be connected through someone, and they'd literally be like, we don't invest in charities. And I'm like, I said nothing. I'm an artificial intelligence, tech-driven partnership solution for businesses. Like, we're not a charitable case at all. And they're just like, no, sustainability, like green, environmental, green, cause, impact. these are all words that just kind of have this like inherent trigger of I don't even know, like fluffiness is the word that comes to mind. The nice to have, the extra, which is I mean, a recipe over society, I suppose. We've done it to ourselves to some degree.
Well, and I think, I mean, I can very much empathize with this because you run into the same thing when it comes to learning, where people are like, "Oh, that's nice to have, but we have work to get done." And you're like, "I'm not asking you to stop working to learn. I'm actually trying to help you see that is part of your business strategy." And I do think that often, and we're in a culture very much that strawmans a lot of things, where it's just like, "Oh, sustainability, that's this whatever example I have in my head." And it's only that. And I think if anything, two things that you talked about that I really think anybody who watches or listens to this should be thinking about is, first of all, one, chances are the definition you have in your head is probably way too narrow than it is. It's like, oh, when I hear sustainable, just write it down and go, I think, and then list those things off and then recognize you probably scratched maybe a percentage of what that actually could look like, which I think is why I was really excited to talk about this, because to me, I think there's so much value in this, but I get frustrated for the same reasons you do, where people go, well, times are tough right now. We don't really have a way to, focus on that side of things, which gets to the second assumption that you hit on that I think is really important is sustainability is actually not in competition with your business performance. It's not like, oh, we got to have extra to contribute back to this. If anything, running in a sustainable way actually makes you more efficient. I mean, the very definition of sustainable, when you think about it in terms of, if you think about your fitness, you don't go, oh no, I don't want to be sustainable in the marathon. I really want to burn out in the first mile and a half. That's my goal for this marathon, is to get to mile 1 and just be shot and then collapse on the pavement. Like, no, you want to finish strong. You want to run the whole marathon and finish with a good time. But somehow when we think about it in terms of business, we flip-flop this into, we just don't think that way.
Yeah. And to touch on the first point, I completely agree. And it's like I don't know where it started, but this concept of sustainability, ESG, social impact, I use a lot of these words kind of not interchangeably, but they all kind of have the same concept with it. I mean, like individuals, like Larry Fink from BlackRock, he just has stopped using these words altogether because they've become so polarized, but also because people often know that they don't know what you're talking about because they have this preconceived idea of what that word means. And in the initial phases of a conversation, like you can't go, like you can explain it because they have this like narrow blinded, horse track on, and they're like, that's it. But it's amazing. It's amazing how many of the conversations that we have with businesses specifically, when you give them a use case, it's so powerful for them to get kind of like to visualize like what it is I am talking about and what we're trying to create. That they're like, oh, I never knew that it could be this simple or that cost effective or help me in the long run. And the relationships that we create are like, they're win. Like it's better for your business. It's better for your customers. It's better for the world. And it's better for like everyone at the end of the day because of what you're actually trying to do. And it's like, it takes a little creativity, sure. But I think that's when the really fun use cases come out. Like for example, Boulder, Colorado. I got my master's from there, and Celestial Tea, the Sleepy Bear big tea brand, is based just outside of Boulder. And at one point in time, they decided it was revolutionary. They decided to remove the little strings, the little paper clip and tag that says what sort of tea it is, so you can't like stir it around. And the reason was because they wanted to be more sustainable. And so you look at it, when they're producing millions upon millions of bags of tea, and they remove a piece of string, 2 staples, and a little piece of paper, and a little bit of ink that's printed on this piece of paper, and then you extrapolate that out to millions of those, you're saving a ton of paper, a ton of string, a ton of staples, ink, as well as time in the actual processing of getting a tea bag from start to finish. And that is such a brilliant use case because you're using less resources. That's costing you less. It's costing you less time. And at the end of the day, you could say we are also making this sustainable change that's better for the world. Those are the ones that I'm really excited about and try to kind of create through this like lens of you just have to think about it from a different perspective and not get so turned off by the aspect of sustainability being that nice to have, cost extra money and things like that. And it's one of those points I think we're getting there as more and more people kind of see that. The potential of it, but it's going to take time, certainly.
Well, and going back to that, and I'm curious, I want to transition a little bit here, but I think your point in unpacking that as a use case, or just as an example of this, I think it shows sometimes our very, very limited thinking when we think about things, where we can just shut down an idea before we really unpack and explore the possibilities of it, where we go, well, yeah, sustainability is not going to work because this won't work. And it's like, well, hang on. You've predetermined something based on a single instance instead of looking at where could there be opportunities where we can be more sustainable, but it improves our business. Like the example you used of the tea bag, that's good for people. That's good for the company. That's good for the earth, like all around. There's nobody that's like, this is a terrible idea. We really would do this because we've always had a string on the tea bag type of a thing. But I have a feeling that someone somewhere might have pushed back and gone, well, people have always used tea bags this way. How are we going to and you're like, okay, that can't be a reason to not do it.
Yeah, the people who now have to take a spoon out and use the spoon to stir it rather than dip the actual tea bag. And you're like, okay, if those are the only people who are actually pushing against this, like, is it that big of a loss? Like, let's be honest here. It's such a good point.
But I think with that, this goes back to some of the challenges and I think the conversation, just so you know, anybody who's watching or listening to this problem we're talking about, I actually see infects a lot of different things. And what we're getting at here is we often sometimes manage to the exception, like you just described with the tea. Well, how many people actually are going to be pissed off at the fact they have to get a spoon out to take the tea bag out? And you're like, well, there might be someone. There will probably be one person. And you're like, so the 2 people in the world who are losing their cool over something this ridiculous, we're going to change our whole strategy as a business that's good for people, good for the earth, good for our product. We're going to build our strategy around those few exceptions. And I think that's a real risk for a lot of things where people eliminate opportunities simply because someone, and half the time it's a hypothetical. There's not even data behind. Like, do we have data that a large percentage of our customers are going to get really mad about this?
Yeah, and I mean, sustainability aside, even some of my past work has been as like a innovation consultant and strategist, and from that extent, and it's literally looking at things that a company or business organization does and how you can do it differently. And you get the people that, the response that we always, perk up about is like, this is how we've always done things, and that to us is like free candy, because we're like, okay, that means it's old, it's antiquated, probably inefficient, and the process can be updated in some way. And you're going to get some that pushes back because, change is difficult. Look at change management techniques and whatnot, but it's also going to be better for you, the business, the personnel involved, once you actually get it up and rolling. And sometimes you just need to, go against the grain a little bit to get to that point. But it happens day in, day out with organizations of all sizes and even individuals on that level too. It's like, I need to separate my recycling. Like, that's an easy example, but more so it's like, turn the lights off or switch your light bulbs out. Like, these new eco-friendly light bulbs, I want to change them for the next 30 years of my life, sort of thing. It's going to be more eco-friendly too. And so it's like, but I've used these ones, and these ones are a little whiter versus yellower. And so it's those little things, I think, that are just, we're so like inherently triggered by, changes and like getting out of a routine. We are creatures of habit. But once you are able to kind of take one step out of the normal fast lane there, you can kind of realize like, okay, it's not that bad. And it's actually has those benefits for all those different stakeholders involved.
Well, and I was chuckling to myself thinking of your light bulb example, because I just think of human behavior. And as somebody who just observes and studies human behavior of this, it is interesting how we almost do have an allergic reaction to change. And then we start to come up with all the reasons why our allergic reaction is justified. And I just even think of the light bulb example where I mean, again, I can see this, and it brings back a family memory where I had suggested this, like with my and it was this allergic reaction because it was this, well, if we do that, we're going to have to change every light bulb. And do you know how much it's going to cost? And I'm like, I'm not saying we change every light bulb in the world today. I'm just saying, when your light bulb burns out, replace it with one of these bulbs instead, type of a thing, like fitting that in. And there is that tendency to just react. But if anything, I think when we have those reactions, that's the perfect time, to your point, to lean into it and go, hang on a second. Is this really validated? And I don't know about you, but I found seeking for data to support it, like actual data, not just, well, I think people won't want to take a tea bag out with a spoon. Okay, well, your thinking is not interesting to me. I'm curious, do we have any research or data to support this as a legitimate thing that we're going to have to work around? And also being open to the idea that even if you have challenges, everything has challenges. You don't throw in the towel every time you come against a barrier.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one thing too, we see that all the time with businesses where it's like they are so hesitant to adopt these new changes and they're like, well, we have this customer base or we have this market share, we have this or that. But then you have this kind of superfluous rationale of why you don't want to do these different things. And a lot of it's like difficulty, time, bandwidth, resources. But then you look at the other side of things, and this, especially with sustainability, the shift that we're in, that all these different stakeholders, investors, employees, consumers, in extremely high percentages of each of them are really pushing this pressure, putting this pressure on companies to like start being more transparent and honest and do things differently. And so like the numbers, the data is there. And sometimes it's just, put in front of the right people to have them see that. And I hate to say it, but bring the money signs back to it. Like you can save more money and make more money if you make these changes. And by the way, it also is green. It's better for the planet or the people and all those different things. But sometimes you just have to, have to appeal to the right stakeholder that you're talking to and get them to see it in the right way. But like the light bulb with your family, it's like, we just changed one. This is going to be okay. Let's see how it reacts. And then maybe we could change 3. And then, we go like that, like one step at a time, folks. Like that's the lesson at the end of the day.
Well, and I think you hit on another point there, is that I can't think of the number of times in my career where some of those reactions to change are based on assumptions. And getting around that is sometimes even just going, have we asked? Like I think of an example where there was this perceived massive change in the organization that I was proposing that was like, we are not going to be able to do it because there is a regulatory agency. They require us to do this, all this stuff. And I said, have we ever asked them? And it was just one of these like, well, no, but we just know. And I remember going, well, how about give me a phone number and I will call and I'll have a discussion with them and let's see if we can get there. And having that discussion, turns out the assumption we had about this regulatory agency was completely wrong. And whatever information had informed the decision before, maybe it was true at some point, but it's not true anymore. And that actually gets to something we talked about backstage, which is with the pace at which things are moving right now, you almost have to embed this into your ethos, because even something that may legitimately have been a barrier to this 3 weeks ago might not be a barrier anymore. You might be like, we didn't have the time or the resources or the capability. And now new AI model comes out and you're like, oh, actually now it's completely feasible.
Yeah. And it's funny. It brings me back to this. It was a video or something. I think Gary Vaynerchuk, and he, this big, very high energetic guy. And he's like, at every business junction, every bottleneck, every issue you have as a company, you just play the and game. And he basically is like, you have a problem and you say, and you say the reason of the problem, you say, and again, and you say, okay. And you start to realize that a lot of these things like come from the place of like, we think that this is an issue, but it's actually not. Or, if we have some regulation, but is it really an issue with what we're trying to do? Or if you, try to talk to someone, can we mitigate this or eliminate it? And that goes back to change from like a holistic perspective. Like sometimes it just requires you to like ask one more question, like, why are we doing things this way? How much friction would it, cause us as an organization to actually put some pressure on and try to like, counteract it or some way? And like, oftentimes it's as easy as just saying, no, we just need to do like an extra 5 minutes of due diligence or research or talk to one other person, and it alleviates it completely and sets you on a new direction, moving forward, which is ultimately better for you in the business.
Yeah. So it is funny though. I mean, even in my experience, because it sounds like we have a similar path, albeit in different directions, where it's one of these things where at the core, it's just like, hey, let's challenge our assumptions and let's see if there's, because really when we're talking about sustainability, and I think breaking this box, really what we're talking about is there a better way to do this? Could we, really, if you think about, isn't sustainability, from everything you've just described right now, when I think about what you're describing, really what you're asking is there a better way? And when I say better, I don't just mean squeeze more blood from a turnip, but is there a more effective way to do this that is just better all around for all parties involved? And that's really just the question you're exploring.
100%. And I mean, to use that example, squeeze more blood from a turnip, like you are getting more from this particular action. It's a better way. It's a more effective, it's going to improve the output or what's actually created from it. And so this concept of sustainability is looking at more efficient, quicker, simpler, less resource dependent ways and solutions of doing things. And that in itself is sustainability. That's making something more sustainable than it previously was. And that's also one big thing, like, especially when you talk about scalability, you don't need to completely revamp. Like you said, you don't need to replace every, 3 million light bulbs that you have in your things, but like little changes go a long way, and making something more sustainable is making something better. It's improving a process that's, reducing a single line item's cost by 5 cents. If you do that a million times, you're making a bigger change, but it's also requiring less energy or less water usage or whatever your particular domain is. But it's so true. And that's one of the things that I think you need to see sustainability, impact, all these different things in business is like synergistic, because they actually go hand in hand with each other. And if done properly, they will be more beneficial for your business, your company, you as an individual, 100%. And I think that's one of the preconceived concept of like sustainability costs a lot of money. It costs extra. It's implementing these things, it's buying more things, but it's actually quite the opposite at the end of the day. It's improving, it's reducing, it's having the ability to think about something and make it better from that extent, which is going to save you and do better for you, the business, and like, the people, the planet, that whole thing too. It's remarkable, really.
Well, and going back to even what you said there in terms of it may be a yes and type thing. Like I just think of the complexity of this. Might there be situations where you go, okay, making this change is an investment, but you're not making it, again, going back to sustainability and that marathon thing, you're looking at it going, we're making this shorter term investment in a longer term gain type of a thing. And that sometimes may be the case. Other times it might be as simple as going, hey, by actually eliminating this, we don't even have to invest in it. We actually eliminate it and we gain a bunch of this. So there isn't even a universal, it's always this or it's always this, depending on the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah. And to touch on that, and I think that's a good thing too, because maybe for some of the viewers, they're like, yeah, it's not that simple. It's not as easy as just kind of reducing or cutting. And we don't have a business that works like that. And that's very true. But what you hinted at is we live in such like a quarter to quarter, short-term basis for businesses, I think. And that is oftentimes a limiting factor, because sometimes you do have to make a little bit of an upfront investment to see the long-term effects of it. And sustainability is one of those fields that you do need to think from a distant perspective. You need to think of like the down the line, the third-party consequences that happens when you implement some of these practices or use some of these technologies. And I think that can be a little overwhelming, because that initial, perhaps small investment or investment into a new tech or a new system or a new process sometimes does require a little bit of a change, which inevitably costs money, time, people's, bandwidth. But at the same time, if you're using the marathon example, if I was going to say, hey, if you pace yourself out these next 2 miles, you have the next 24 miles to actually like hold off, and you're going to even improve and get better and better as you progress. That's the mentality that you have to get with this. And that's what sustainability is at the end of the day. It's like making those improvements. That's going to not be better for you just today, but also tomorrow, the next month, the next quarter, the next year, and well beyond that.
So on this note, because I think this has been really helpful, just even talking through, and hopefully people who watch and listen, this is helping you, first of all, one, expand your palette for what we're talking about here, because I can definitely see people coming into it going, oh, this is going to be a go green episode. And it's like, not necessarily, I mean, might that be part of where you put your focus? Maybe, but really it's about what are the problems that you're trying to solve and how do you improve this? Inevitably though, I just even think personally, I think sometimes where these reactions come is where we see this go sideways, or people pursue sustainability in ineffective ways. And just some examples I think of, paper straws. We're just one of these ones where it's like, wow, okay, yeah, it's great. They suck. Like I end up going through 15 straws because the thing falls apart and I can't even drink my drink anymore. And so people have these, or I think of high efficiency washing machines with 7 kids. It was like, hey, it uses no water. And it's like, hey, it also doesn't get my clothes clean. And I've got 7 kids. We've got to run through the wash 33 times. And so some of these things, anybody can bring these examples to mind where they go, yeah, that we thought we were doing a good thing and it failed. What are some of the things that you have seen over the years that help people prevent from making those mistakes where it's like, have you seen contributing factors where people go down a path and you're like, ugh, this is how you got there? And are there key tips to avoid that kind of stuff?
That's a tough one. And so I'll use a personal example. I've been on a mission to find eco-friendly garbage bags. I don't think they exist. If someone is listening, they're out there, please reach out to me and say, there's a great company that make it out of seaweed or something. But the amount of times I bought, a green bag and after being, halfway full, it rips or it leaks or something, because there is no alternative to those super hefty, heavy duty garbage bags out there. They're great. They're fantastic. But that goes the straw example, the washing machine example. Like, you still need to have a good deliverable, a good product, or a good service. And I think the issue right now is that a person will have a bad experience with something. Like, they might have this bag, it rips, and say, oh my goodness, sustainability is the worst. It's the devil. We're never going to touch anything sustainable again. And the issue with that is a lot of companies are actually jumping on this bandwagon to try to get that market share of we put a big green plant on our product and we say we are thinking of the environment and the people and the planet is our top priority. And then you buy the product and it actually sucks. You're like, we've lost that person who wanted to buy that product for that reason, but they're also now a disbeliever in sustainability in general. And
maybe our company as a whole.
Exactly.
Well, but I think to your point, what you actually hit on there, you may have answered my question without even realizing you answered it, which is sustainability cannot be the end game. And I think that's it. It's actually sustainability is the path to whatever you're trying to do. So going back to that example, you can't go, sustainability is the end game, so we can make crappy products so long as they're sustainable, because our end game is, to your point, just to slap a green leaf on our logo. It's like, well, if you do that, it's going to fail for you, because you're going to go, well, yeah, I mean, great, you're sustainable, but people go, yeah, don't ever buy those products because their garbage bags fall apart, their straws dissolve in your drink. It's like, well, no, it has to be, we're solving a real problem. We're developing a meaningful product. We're just actually trying to do it in a way that is in the best interest of all parties involved. We're not looking to how can we do this in a way that doesn't exploit or exacerbate certain problems. And that's really what you're doing. It's not a product. It's not a destination.
Yeah. And so the issue with what you just said, and it's so true, is you have let's just use the garbage bag example because it's really simple and not pinpointing any brand here, but they put out the green bag because they had a couple startups that were competing with their market share. And they're like, let's try it, see what happens. It fails miserably because they have a bad product. And all of a sudden they're like, leadership's, nope, sustainability is not for us. It was a big revenue, it did not generate revenue. It wasted our money, our time. Like, let's go back to the tried and true because that's what we know. But instead you're spot on. And like I like to use the visual of a pyramid where to have purpose as a blanket word, you need to have product and profit built on the bottom first. Like, you need to have a good, solid product that's desired by your consumers. You need to have it actually fill the needs of what they're looking for, whether it's a product or service. You need to be able to create profits with it. And if you can integrate purpose on top, that makes it even stronger. But you shouldn't be trying to stamp a green label, put some seaweed into something and create this, eco-friendly straw that's going to save all the sea turtles. If the product is not going to be ideal, because it's only going to have inverse consequences to the business, to your customers, and to the whole, the rhetoric of the actual sustainability industry at large. And I think we're in that wave where companies were recognizing that it could be a marketing move to say, you hear greenwashing, you hear all these different things, but they're like, there's consumers, there's people that want to buy products because of this reason. You hear the stats over and over. Gen X's will pay, 18% more, making this up, 80% more for a sustainable product or switch brands over. And they're like, well, we want a part of that, but it's not done in the right way. And that, I think, is one of the issues, because I'm hoping we don't get to a point where we circle back and go back to the original product, but more so, can we circle up and start innovating in the right direction and have that strong product base that integrates purpose, sustainability, and things, versus the inverse, which just kind of resuming back to where you originally were, because you recognize like we did just fine here, and maybe the world, will suffer because of it, but at least we're making money. We're making our quarter to quarter, revenue goals, something like that. It's an interesting conversation, and we're right in the middle of it too, which is fascinating.
Well, and everything you talked about there, and even really the whole theme of this, is almost this idea of zooming out a little bit and thinking bigger about it. Because even going back to the example of, let's say, I know we're picking on the garbage bag example one, but if you're a major garbage bag manufacturer and you change your whole product line on this oversimplified assumption and bet that, hey, if we make a green garbage bag, people are going to buy it and love it just because it's green. Who cares if it sucks? You're actually getting double hit, because now not only have you damaged your brand, your product, your all this other stuff, but you've actually generated more waste by actually changing your manufacturing process and doing all this other stuff. And now you just created a whole bunch of green products that actually are just gathering shelf life and junk, plus all the supplies you harvested to create. Your efforts to be sustainable actually created more waste if you don't do this the right way. And I think that's actually the caution, that a lot of times we get so overly myopic in our thinking that it's like sustainable good, pursue it, and not think about that broader picture of, well, yeah, but how are we doing it in a way that actually drives the greater good across the board?
Yeah. And for me, it goes back to this concept. We talked a little bit about this in the pre-show about unintended consequences and thinking about it. And so your paper straw example, it's like, oh, great. Instead of plastic, let's make it out of paper. It's recyclable, it's reusable. And you're using 15 straws to drink a single milkshake. That's not helping anybody. And I'm going to walk away going, I'm never having one of those sinking, paper straws ever again, because they don't actually work. But I've seen that in my other industry that I worked with previously was international development. And so you'd have this great, novel, innovative solution that could, there was a merry-go-round that children could play on and push at a park. And what that did, it creates the kinetic motion to power a pump to get water. But what ended up happening was the kids didn't want to play with this anymore. Next thing you know, these poor women were having to push this merry-go-round thing just to get water out of the pump instead of the normal thing that works. And so it's this concept of like, you try to innovate, make something a little bit more like, not eco-friendly necessarily, but like smarter, intuitive, better, and hit two birds with one stone. But it actually ends up having these inverse consequences and then long-term, it's like, now they're just sitting there idle. Nobody's playing on them. They're broken. No water is tapped to it. And that goes back to the paper straw thing, the plastic bag thing, all these different things. You need to think of that long-term perspective. And are you just trying to ride this quick wave of stamp a green label on it, stamp a community development project label on it and call it a day? Or are you actually thinking this through of how can we actually tie this directly with our business and do something really innovative and unique and have it have that positive benefit? And that's the trifecta. But oftentimes it's short-sighted and it's not thinking of that long-term perspective. I think that is needed for those sort of solutions or changes.
Yeah. Well, and again, you're thinking with the end in mind, but something else you just described there that I think goes back to another challenge we have when we think about this is, by default, we're often very risk averse. And inevitably, with a lot of these experiments, it's like, I think we sometimes forget that failure is part of the innovation process. Inevitably, you have to fail on some of these things to get there, which is why you don't just go all in on something first. And you go, well, again, going back to, I know we keep coming back to this green bag thing, but as an example of this, if you were to experiment with something like this with a small amount and go, does this work? So that we're not necessarily shifting our whole brand on this and investing millions and millions of dollars into it. Prove it out first to say, hey, let's see, is there viability? Let's learn from this process. Let's hone it and improve it, instead of going, all right, we're all in on this. We got to get it perfect on the first round. Let's do it. And then it's like, oh, it didn't work. Well, I guess we're never going to experiment with that again, because I think that does create a culture where then people don't want to experiment anymore, because they go, yeah, we tried that one time and it just blew up. And it's like, well, part of the reason the fallout was so catastrophic was you went all in on it before you even knew if it was a viable product, instead of having an iterative mindset on it.
Yeah. And it's almost from that regard too. It's like, what do you expect to happen when you're doing something like that? That's just throwing everything out there and hoping for the best without having that data-driven approach, without having the testing, the A and B, the this and that. And it's like, you can't even be surprised by it, but that happens so frequently. And then you all of a sudden are back to square one. Where you're like, nope, we tried it. It's not for us. We're going to go back to the original way we've done things. You know, the light bulb, you know, we're not going to install light bulbs in the entire house and all of our properties and everything like that. Like, let's just try it in one room and see what it looks like. And then we can make that change. But it's interesting, and this will pull back the technology piece too. Something that we're working on, I'm really interested in, is the concept of digital twins. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but
yep, very familiar with it.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I think like the rise in AI and everything is making it really, really obtainable. But for the sustainability space, what we are trying to do is have the ability to kind of look at and create these projections on certain scenarios and products and what it look like, and not just projecting, you know, who will buy and things like that, typical consumer analysis, but more so, how is this going to interact with like the everyday environment? How is such a certain partnership or a certain product going to actually be able to create something that's long lasting? What's it going to look like in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? And how is that going to be able to pull back into your direct business line? And I think we're at this point where, you know, the whole conversation here is about sustainability and technology. And it's like, technology is at a point where we need to be able to use it from an aspect to improve what we're doing as a business. And that improvement, if it's tied directly to sustainability, is so incredibly powerful. It's just a matter of getting the means to actually create that. And digital twin technology is one of them, the many ways you can do that. But it's that mental switch that I think that needs to be taken, that doing this sort of work for your business is not something that should be burdensome. It shouldn't be something that you dive in 100%, but like, you do need to have that risk profile. You need to be able to know that like something will fail, and whether you're investing in like a startup or, you know, improving your R&D functions, it is something that's going to take a little time. But at the end of the day, if you actually are able to think long-term and actually have a successful initiative that turns out to be something that's a strong garbage bag, desirable by your customers, that doesn't break every time I put like a pokey box in there, then you are, you know, set for a long time. And that's a specific example. I'm like, you can poke a single finger right through like this, like do something better. And it's a prime example of it for sure.
Well, and and I think to your point of tying this all together, because part of what I really wanted to do with this was to challenge people who listen and watch us to think differently about it. Because again, if you don't think differently about it, and then you just start throwing technology at the problem, you're just going to exacerbate or accelerate the problem. If you're like, hey, sustainability is great, let's just throw AI at it. It's like, well, okay, if you do this wrong, all AI is going to do is speed up how fast you lose money and waste time. Yeah. But I think to your point, to me, one of the things you brought up, and I think I did a weekly update where I talked about the rise of digital twin technology and its ability to simulate very complex things that historically we just haven't even been able to do. It was all very conceptual when we thought about these things. What if we were to do this? How would that change our supply chain? How would it change the way we manufacture our products? What kind of changes would we have to do to incorporate some of these things? And before, it was always, this was one of the biggest challenges, which is why I think technology is not in competition with sustainability. It actually is going to help us, because instead of getting people to go, do you believe in your gut enough that this is going to work? We can actually go, well, let's let AI and digital twin tech run the sim. Yeah. It's not going to get us 100% confident, but it's going to get us from 20 to maybe 80, where we're like, well, okay, what if we make this minor adjustment? And the ability to make those adjustments on the fly without having to go through. I worked with one company who was doing a massive manufacturing thing, and they used to do it in a way where they built complete real environments to simulate, well, what happened if we change the way we did? And it was extremely expensive. It was extremely time consuming, and they needed people to come run through these simulations, and it was just massive. They've been able to completely automate that using immersive tech and AI, that now they get a crazy idea and go, what if? And they run it through there and can very quickly prove or disprove it and go, no, we're going to do it. Or yes, that moves to the next stage of experimentation where we might move it. And the iteration cycle has moved so much faster.
Yeah. And that's something I'm really excited about, because, and I forget there was a TED talk that I watched that kind of leaned in that same example. It's like the whole caption was like, digital twin has the ability to predict the future. And to some extent it does, because you can start looking at these different situations. And what you mentioned before, half an hour ago, about using data and actual like real data, not like the spoonsters. There's a bunch of them that won't want to buy this, but more so it's like, if you stress test, if you put in these certain situations, if you, extrapolate these 20 different scenarios out on like how to mitigate climate change, for a big picture example, and you find the one that has the highest likelihood of success with the least amount of resources, find the technology to do that, like that saves a ton of time, a ton of manpower, a ton of resources, and can oftentimes have more effective and stronger results at the end of the day. And that's something I think that's really, really exciting about, artificial intelligence and all these different tech that's just growing at an exponential rate at this point in time is using them to think about how to actually create these positive changes. And positive not meaning, environmental only, but more so making these examples of how do you think creatively about your business? How do you reduce the length of your string if you're a tea company? Or how do you, find an eco-friendly refrigeration technology that uses less water and energy if you're a food and beverage company? Like these little things are going to make a huge difference. And technology is going to be this assistant tool to find the synergy between the business and the sustainability angle. And you boil it all together and the recipe that comes out is something truly incredible.
Yeah. Well, and I think going back to it, there's 2 points that I would add to this. One being, the implications of this are huge in terms of even finding some of these simple ways that we historically have just never had the capacity to do. I just even think of a manufacturing or distribution company that I was working with on some of this stuff. And it was impossible. There were just too many variables and too much data for them ever to take the time to actually look at, hey, what if we changed our distribution channels and the way we move things around so that we could actually reduce our carbon footprint simply by eliminating how many trips people need to make and the way our products move around and all this other stuff. It wasn't sustainable for them to pursue it in the past because it was like, well, we'd have to hire 5,000 consultants doing data analysis over the next 30 years for us to do this. And now it was, oh, actually, we can actually pull people in and we can run these things like that and quickly start to make decisions, which I know sometimes that freaks people out. And this is the second point. Sometimes people hear this and they go, oh no, the machines are going to take over the world and what is going to be left for us to do. But even in that example, one of the things that I found that was so powerful was going back to this, everybody wins in these environments. Is as we went through that exercise, one, we were able to actually significantly reduce their costs in distribution and supply chain stuff. We were able to reduce carbon emissions by, and again, we had the data to back it to show, well, if we do this, this is how much emissions we're going to reduce. And it actually improved the employees' well-being as they went through this, because instead of spending all this time in meetings, speculating on Lord knows what, going through piles and piles of data, going, what are we even doing with this? They spent their time discussing the different variables and the hypotheses and going, well, what if we did it this way? And hey, maybe we let's actually go run this experiment and how well it works. They actually got to spend their time on higher order, meaningful activities where they saw the output of what they were doing. It was like, we did this, we actually drove the change and we saw the results of it. It was like everybody wins. The tide went up for everybody instead of this oh, this is going to be horrible.
Yeah. And how many times have you heard this, like, oh, technology is going to take jobs away. It's going to remove this and that. But I say, like, with my work and everything I've done with technology, AI and things like that, it's going to make you better at your job. It's going to optimize the work you're doing. And it's going to allow you to pursue things that have greater potential, bigger cost savers, sure, but also more like unique and innovative, fun, creative, whatever you want to call it. But technology has the ability to save you so much time. And then you can focus on the things that you are, trained to do or passionate about doing. And I think that's like that one of the mental switches that people are kind of hesitant about, using technology to, you have a data analyst, that's their job to look at, hundreds and thousands of rows in an Excel document. And the fact that you can ask ChatGPT to find a trend and a pattern and predict the future, what this might look like, and it'll give you something within 6 seconds, that scares all those data analysts. But then you train those people to say, how do you use the fact that you now have this tool? What can you do with this? Like, this is a magical, like, crystal ball of a technology here. And then challenge them to look beyond that initial scope of, like, you're not just doing these, rote calculations or whatnot, and using it to your advantage, because we now have this incredible, powerful tool right in front of us that we all have access to. and the potential of that is what I think we need to really start thinking about. And that's where businesses are going to thrive, when they're starting to realize that you can do things more efficiently, you can do things more streamlined, quicker, with less people. But the ones that also think creatively about it and can actually use those efficiencies to benefit them, create create more output, I think are the ones that are really going to thrive. And that's something that I'm really excited about. There's the concept that there's two types of people. The one that look at ChatGPT is like, I could take a 40-hour work week and I could do all my work in 30 hours instead. That's fantastic. I look at it and say, I could take a 40-hour work week and I could do 60 hours worth of work in that 40-hour work week. And that's incredible, because that has that exponential growth in my actual output as a business, as well as what we're trying to do as a company. And that mentality, I think, is like what's going to set a lot of people apart, but also businesses too, that are using it to really thrive and innovate from that extent, which is interesting at the end of the day.
It is. And one of the things you brought up that I think is actually really exciting about what you just described is, as you describe those two categories of folks, who some may go, well, now I can do 40 hours of work in 30. And then the other folks who, again, I talk a lot about, AI is actually just making a bigger pie. And if you're looking at it through the lens of, well, it's just doing more of what's in this pie, it's like, well, yeah, then that's intimidating. But if you look at the fact it just made the pie exponentially bigger, it's a better place. But I think what I get really excited about with this is it's allowing us to personalize that, because I don't look at those two groups of people and go, one's good, one's bad. Because it's one of those things where it's like, for some people, based on where they are, their life requires them to be able to do 30 hours of work. And someone else has the 40 and they go, but I just want to go over here. And now, based on what you really love doing, what's important to you, even going back to the whole point of sustainability, to do things better, you now have the flexibility to do this. And I just think about one of the things that hits home for this is, we look at where the retirement age just keeps getting longer and longer and longer and further out, because it's just harder to kind of, hit this point where you hit retirement. And I think this opens up the flexibility to say, well, now there are certain people who may be in a time in their life where they go, I can't contribute this many hours, but I still want to contribute. And I want to contribute in meaningful ways. I think this just opens up so much possibility for how we actually can create a better world moving forward. But I think it's all in what we do with it. Because I can also think, to the naysayers who hear this and go, yeah, this is a bunch of kumbaya type of stuff. I also very much recognize that it's like, yeah, we could also do the opposite with this. To the example of the data analyst, could a company make the mistake of just saying, hey, let's let AI do this and make all our decisions for us and just trust that it's doing a good job? I can already think of multiple examples in recent months where companies have made that decision and it has not fared well for them. And so I think it's one of those, we're at this inflection point of, we can either create a much better, more sustainable future, or we can just keep doing what we're already doing and just throw more technology at it, and we can send the ship down even faster than it's already sinking.
Yeah, and that goes back some of my master's research and some of my PhD as well, is ethical technology, especially ethical emerging technology. And, I believe it was Kathy O'Brien that said very well that algorithms are just, it's just opinions or biases embedded into code. And so you have to look at who is creating these and who is giving the orders. And, you have prompt engineering as this field that's opening up out of nowhere. And you have to figure out that, like, technology is not a blanket solution that you just put on everything. Like, there's a huge red flag if a company starts to outsource and put everything. And like, that's the aspect of human in the loop interactions that I think is so incredibly important to think about. Because when you have the companies, and we've seen them time and time again, that are, putting too much emphasis on the tech, and it's inherently biased, or, like something goes wrong along the way, and you're up a creek. And I think you said it really well. It's like, how do you look at technology as a tool to help you do things better, but still have the comprehensive capability to know that you are an individual, you know the business best, and you want to make what's best decision for the business in the long run, and combine those all together. And like, it's funny because all your viewers would be like, you're asking to add this and this and this and this and this all together, but it is simple when you break it down. It's like, how do you make something better? I love that aspect of, like, sustainability is making something better, more effective, more impactful, and technology can help you do that if you use it in the right way. fully acknowledging that oftentimes technology is not the right solution. Oftentimes there is the need to do something manually or do something how it was done before. But when in the right use cases, and now more than ever, it's becoming more of a use case, technology is often the answer to help you achieve those goals.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to something that I often try and combat where, and this is just true of life, there are some things you just can't short circuit. You can't just say, well, how do I skip that step? If you want to get in shape, you don't be like, so how do I get in shape without exercising at all? Is there just like a way that I can just, strap something to me? And we've seen these products, right? Over the years, It's like, hey, just put these electrodes on your stomach and you'll have 8-pack abs. And you're like, okay, that actually isn't going to work. No matter how much electricity you wire into your stomach, you're not going to look like Men's Health because you plugged yourself into a wall. And I think the same is true with technology, where it's like the hard work of figuring out what problem you're trying to solve, how to do it better, how you're going to overcome these challenges. That is still really hard, but meaningful work that still stays ahead, regardless of where technology goes. I think what's encouraging about it is we're kind of reaching this point where it's like, we've reached our capacity to do that. And AI now can come alongside and help us do the hard work. Doesn't help us avoid it. It just helps us do it in better, more meaningful ways. And I think that's really the theme of everything we talked about here is it's worth it in the end, though. It's hard work, but it's worth it in the end, because if you do it right, the tide just goes up for everyone involved.
Yeah, and you start to kind of realize all these, stats and headlines you see about the future industries that are going to be completely obsolete, or the positions, whatnot. But then you hear the ones that are going to be highly demanded. And it's like the knowledge workers, the people, and I use the word creativity a lot because I think it's really important in the future generations. Like, at one point I was teaching a course on the future of work here in Arizona. And you need to be able to think of things creatively, period. You need to be able to look at things from a different perspective. You need to think of the end users, the different stakeholders, the different areas of what that business, what that product or service will actually do. And like you said, it requires work still. There's no plug in a solution and it does everything for you. And the people that have that kind of misconception, I think, are the ones that are going to struggle a little bit. And that trickles down to sustainability and impact as well. And that's like, what we were trying to do at Koru is like that whole concept of like mitigating that need to think of it and see it as an overwhelming thing. But every individual, every employee, this technology wave is going to hit you and it's going to impact you. And there's no running from it. And the sooner that you can kind of accept it and kind of learn it. Exactly. And you talk to people who are like, we're just in a wave. You're like, no. The world is forever changed with OpenAI. Sam Altman changed the face of the world with what they're doing. And we are in this exponential curve where it's only going to get more and more extreme. We were talking about it. We're just in this roller coaster ride. You better buckle down because this is going to continue to go this direction. And you need to prepare for it and also be ready for it. Because if you are in the position where you're just kind of like hunkering down and waiting for it to pass, company change is going to pass you by really quick. And you're going to be kind of like made obsolete to some extent, not to sound extreme or more morbid, and that's not it's true.
Well, it can feel extreme, but the thing is too, and I think this is an important message, because sometimes people feel this and they feel like it's just this new overwhelming thing, and it's like, we have gone through this many times before. I'm sure there were people when when vehicles started coming out that just went, this whole car thing, like, I'm not buying into this. When electricity came out, like electricity, I don't really know if I'm going to get into this whole thing. We've seen this era when the internet came out. It was like, I'm not an internet online business. And it's like, well, actually, yeah, all are now. So It's one of those things that we just will adapt and adjust to. But to your point, your biggest threat is actually you and your ability to adapt to the change. And, but the final thing I'll say is your point on the creativity. I completely agree with this. And for those, just as a plug for my Friday weekly update, there's a new study coming out that says GPT beat humans in divergent thinking and whatever. And I'm looking forward to actually sharing my thoughts on this, because don't buy it. Like, don't buy, there's truth in it, but I think some of these fear-mongering headlines of AI's going to do everything that we can do better or as well as we can. It's like, no, it's not, but you are going to have to do things differently. And that is an inevitability.
Yeah. There was one that came out, this is probably a number of months ago, it was like, ChatGPT passed the bar, the MCAT, the LSAT, all these different things with flying colors, and everyone's like lawyers, doctors, engineers, like all of us are going to be out of jobs pretty soon. And it's like, okay, let's not freak out. The world's not on fire from that regard. And you want to be able to be like, okay, how do we use this as a tool? Once again, I sound like a broken record, but it is kind of funny to some extent. But it's how people take these quick headlines and really just blow them out of proportion and kind of start running for the hills and in that chaos mode. And I think it's a lot about like keep cool, realize that this is a wave, it's coming. We've seen it before. Maybe this is different, than a computer, personal computer, cars, vehicle, electricity, internet, but it's the new wave and it's going to adopt, the companies are going to adopt it. Others are going to fight against it and they might become obsolete and fail, but that's the world will go on. And that's like what we've seen from time and time again.
No. Well, and I don't know about you, but I don't choose a lawyer based on they passed the bar.
It's like, check. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, well, you passed the bar. Well, then by all means, let's do this. So
help me out.
Yeah. And again, this goes with the whole theme of sustainable thinking and living just in general, which is not, do you recycle and do you eat green? It's, hey, how are you thinking with the end in mind? And how are you living in a way so you finish the marathon instead of collapsing a mile and a half in? So Ricky, I have kept you over, but thank you so much for this discussion. And I really hope that everybody who watches and listens, this is an encouragement about what this can mean. And I hope it's challenged some of your assumptions about it, because I'm with you, Ricky, that there's a lot of assumptions out there that I do not think are helpful for this conversation. So thanks for being here and helping me navigate it.
Yeah, likewise, Christopher. It's been great to be here. And this is a conversation, obviously, I'm very passionate about, but it's exciting, the wave of innovation and the words that are being used around sustainability, technology, and things like that. And so I'm ready for the change that are coming, but I think it's going to be an exciting one for sure. So it's great to speak to you a little bit. I look forward to keeping in touch as we progress here. Sounds good. Well, I won't have you close out with "Livin' La Vida Loca," but I'll put the microphone down. Sorry. Well, thanks everybody for watching and listening, and we will see you on the other side.